this is a fun one. Let's get into it, starting with Spinnerack. This is a Spinnerack from Aquapolis. Nothing too fancy here. The idea is mainly to get Spinnerack into play, only to evolve up into Dark Ariados, which we'll be getting to here in a minute. It's got a 1 energy attack that allows you to disrupt your opponent, yank out one of their bench Pokemon with its Entangle attack, and every now and then, not always, but you will be relying on Poison Bind, which does have a high cost for a 60 HP Stage 1 Pokemon, but you are dealing 30 damage, technically 40 because the Pokemon is automatically poisoned. But even better than that, you flip a coin, and if heads, your opponent's active Pokemon cannot retreat, and no trainer or Pokemon power can move it out of that active position. So with the right amount of luck, you are getting a lot of value out of those 3 energy. It's just on a very fragile Pokemon. But your main damage dealer is going to be Dark Fortress. So 4 copies of Pineco, mainly to evolve up into Dark Fortress. For only 2 energy, it's going to deal 60 damage. This is an absolute donk Pokemon. This deck is mainly going to center around disrupting your opponent's early game by just turn 2 Dark Fortress Explosion, knocking out whatever your opponent's active is. Hopefully you're able to keep Dark Fortress alive by potentially comboing off of Armor Up for 1 energy, but odds are you're never going to use Armor Up the turn before. You're usually just going to be evolving straight up into Dark Fortress, exploding, hopefully knocking out your opponent's active. But more often than not, Fortress is going to stay alive because of the Rocket's Hideout Gem. For the choice of Grimer, I ended up going with a full playset of the Legendary Collection one, and then we're going to be evolving up into Aquapolis Muck, which has this odd trade-off between its Pokebody and its Burning Sludge attack. Having more grass energy attached to Muck allows you a higher chance to inflict poison and burn on your opponent's Pokemon with Burning Sludge, but it also means that Muck is going to be a lot harder to retreat, which once Muck is in the active position, you're not going to be retreating it anyway. You're just going to be using that Burning Sludge attack over and over again until it's knocked out. As I was saying earlier, this deck is going to heavily rely on Rocket's Hideout, which is going to give all of your Dark Pokemon an additional 20 HP. That way, when Dark Fortress explodes, it's not going to knock itself out. It's going to leave itself with 20 HP, which then forces your opponent to spend another turn attacking just to knock it out, while you get that extra turn to set up another Dark Fortress for an explosion. In the meantime, you are setting up a Muck or a Dark Ariados on the bench to move into the active slot in the mid to late game after you've kind of knocked out all of your opponent's hopes with their starting Pokemon. You can move Muck in there and kind of dwindle down the rest of their team with special conditions, or in the case of Dark Ariados as well. The search and draw for this deck is going to be coming from a full playset of Pokemon Fan Club, 2 copies of Copycat, and 3 copies of Bill's Teleporter, which is a bit of a risky card to rely on for draw power in a deck that has so few draw cards, but this is a ninja deck. You could potentially play 3 cards and draw 0, or you could play 3 cards and draw 12. Risk and reward, you know. Goldberry is going to work in a couple different ways. One, it's going to be able to heal up a Dark Fortress if you've already gotten that bonus 20 HP from Rocket's Hideout, which shouldn't be a problem. Not a whole lot of decks in this little theme deck format are running any counter stadiums, so you get the 20 bonus on the Dark Fortress, attach a Goldberry after it explodes and deals 60 damage for 2 energy to your opponent's active. It's going to go right back up to 60 HP itself once the Goldberry triggers between turns. A sneaky little maneuver fit for a ninja, just continuously throwing bombs onto the battlefield to explode. This is very much a gimmick deck, and to play even more into the disruptive nature of this deck, we've got energy removal too, which is potentially going to be knocking energy off of your opponent. 2 copies of Double Gust. Those 2 copies are mainly just to get Muck out of really sticky situations, which you would think Muck would love, but it's purely for those, because otherwise you're going to be using special conditions and you don't want to be swapping out your opponent's active. You want their active to be stuck where it is so you can rack up damage. Double Gust is going to have its utility every now and then, but more than likely you're going to be relying more on these 2 copies of Switch. Also have 2 copies of Recycle Energy in here specifically for Muck, since it can deal that chip damage off of just a couple of recycle energies. Ideally, it's attach a grass, attach a recycle. That way, when it's knocked out, you at least get one of those back to attach to another Muck. And then the rest of the deck is going to be filled out with 15 grass energy. If you get the resources you need early on, this deck can absolutely steamroll your opponent. The thing that hitches it up is not drawing exactly what you need because there's not a lot of draw power in this deck. That's how I tried to limit it. Because for a theme deck format, the ability to just deal 60 damage on turn 2 and then again on turn 3 and potentially have even more fortress set up on the bench for turns 4 and 5, yet that's a bit too much and makes it not so fun to play against because you could just remove the Dark Ariados line from this deck and completely streamline it to be about Dark Fortress, but then it's not really a theme deck, it's just an explosion deck that doesn't particularly fit with Koga's team. So while the deck is on theme with Koga and it is challenging, you know, as an Elite Four deck should be, I did have to hinder it a little bit just to keep the fun aspect going. For all involved, plus the 3 Pokemon lines that are included in this deck are lines of Pokemon that have barely seen play, if any, and so I wanted to have a bit more fun and build upon those for this Koga deck. And I already know what you're thinking. Yes, the biggest mistake I made in building this deck was not using the Grimer from Aquapolis. I mean, it's a complete blunder. Look at this face. How could you deny this face? There is the Fossil Muck that was reprinted in Legendary Collection that we could use in this deck, but Toxic Gas is not very useful in E-Card or Neo-On, really. If it turned off Poke Bodies, that would be another story, because then it would actually pair really well with that Aquapolis Muck, but on its own in this theme deck format, not very good. The alternative Ariadoses are both pretty interesting and underused, so they would have been good for the theme deck, but I didn't feel like they brought as much flavor as the Dark Ariados did, and that's why I went with Dark Ariados. I know I keep saying Ariados and Ariados differently. Whenever I try to think about the words actually coming out of my mouth, it makes them change. Skyridge Fortress is kind of in the same boat, where it is an interesting card that I would have liked to use, but it didn't bring as much flavor and ninja synergy as Dark Fortress did. Koga also has access to Venomoth and Crobat through his in-game team. Though neither of them made the final cut, let's take a look at what cards we do have available for if you want to do a different build for yourself. Both available Venomoths are kind of boring and underwhelming for Stage 1 Pokemon, which most Venomoth cards are, sadly. Revelation Crobat is an amazing low-cost attacker that really puts your opponent on their toes and makes them second-guess what their next move is. A lot of times you force them to attach an energy to their active Pokemon and then try to like double gust and get it back into the active position, do a bunch of shenanigans and waste a bunch of cards in their hand just to get around that one little effect. The Revelation Dark Crobat is another amazing card with a fantastic Pokemon power and a pretty decent low energy attack. Even more amazing when you consider the types of Zubat and Golbat you have available to evolve up into these different Crobats. The problem is when you include any Stage 2 Pokemon in a theme deck, that's taking up a lot of room that could be better spent on more Stage 1 or basic Pokemon. And for these theme decks, I did want to put more focus on those Pokemon that didn't see a lot of play. And Crobat and Dark Crobat that I just put up on screen have seen a ton of play because they're very good in their own archetypes. Even Skyridge Crobat that isn't even all that good still sees a little bit of play as just a bonus card in those E-Card Golbat archetypes. Stadium Koga also uses Weezing as well as the Nidos, so let's go ahead and take a look at those. E-Card Weezing from Expedition would have fit pretty well with the Dark Fortress gimmick of just blowing up, but Weezing blows up for 3 energy and only 50% of the time, because if you flip a coin and get heads, you're just dealing straight up 60 damage for 3 energy. This one almost made the cut, if not for the fact that I wanted to use it in another deck that might be coming up later. As for the Nidos, they could serve as just decent damage dealers, even more so if double colorless energy was available in this format, but sadly it's not. So they all end up just sadly being middle evolution mediocre, and I didn't want to include any Nido Queens or Nido Kings just because, like I said earlier, putting those Stage 2 Pokemon in a theme deck really takes up a lot of space. And that is the deck. Be sure to let me know what you think down in the comments section. Let me know what changes you would make. Let me know if you've been building along with any of these theme decks, if you've actually played them against one another, tested them out. While you're down there, let me know what types of theme decks you would like to see in the future, or just Pokemon content in general that you'd like to see added to the channel. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for more theme decks in the coming weeks. Social media links are down in the description. I'll see you next video.